In progress. And we are an executive search firm. We've been operating across Africa for the last 20 years, offering permanent, part-time and hourly executive talent, whether that's for board roles or interim fractional roles or speakers or specialists. And we're really, really excited to be offering these end-to-end solutions from a talent point of view. It's really wonderful that we can welcome everybody here and distributing this afterward to everybody. We know that on the call, we've got candidates, we've got colleagues, we've got contacts, we've got clients. And from that part of the audience, from an employer point of view, we have from everybody from a multinational all the way through to startups. And I think that's the very important thing to get right and to understand is the difference, between sales and business development, obviously, is an important distinction to make. But the speakers today are going to cover as many stories as they can within the time. I will share the agenda with you, so we're very clear on today. I'm welcoming you, as we know. Then we're going to welcome Brigitte Da Gama. After that, Kendi, then Roger, and then we're going to open up the floor for discussion purposes. Please, as you're going, there is a chat option. So please ensure that you are absolutely being part of the chat, leaving comments, asking questions, and we will leave all of those till the end of the session and gather as much intel as we can. So I am very excited to welcome our first speaker, which is Brigitte Da Gama. Brigitte was the former executive director of human capital at McDonald, South Africa. She's a seasoned human capital professional with over 20 years experience across banking, IT, asset management, and tertiary education. She's won several national and international awards, including the CHRO South Africa Talent Award, the CHRO 2020 Empowerment Award, and she was the winner of the Future of HR Director of the Year Award. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome you, Brigitte. I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can all see you as we speak. I think it's easy if you know how to just make the speaker, whoever's speaking, to be the one who's featured large on your screen. So I'm going to go on mute and send a very big welcome to Brigitte.
Hi, everybody. Can you see me and hear me?
We can.
Great stuff. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon, having this conversation. And I believe people are from various countries. And it's always exciting to be speaking to colleagues from different countries, from different parts of Africa as well. So the head of sales role is a very, very interesting one, in my view. Obviously, a very important position in any organization, particularly listed organizations. So from my perspective, the first thing I'd like to reflect on is what is required for that role to be successful? What kind of skills or attributes would one want to recruit into a head of sales position? And I've sort of reflected on this, and I can think of 5, and I'm really happy to converse and debate with you in the event that you can think of others. I'm sure there are many others. But for me, the top 5, I would say, obviously, confidence. You need somebody who's able to maintain a positive attitude always, especially in the face of rejection, because that will happen from time to time if you are in this particular position. I think it goes without saying that one would have to be particularly resilient. One would have to be able to communicate with conviction. And even in instances where you may not be successful, you'd have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and continue with enthusiasm onto that next pitch, looking at that next opportunity. Another one, I think, is the ability to listen actively, to understand the needs of the customer, the ability to communicate, to build trust with customers, trust is obviously so important in this role, and the ability to cultivate that in potential customers and existing customers. And when I think of, this whole concept of active listening to the client, I think particularly of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who speaks about empathy, the empathy that one needs to build in particular with customers. And he's trying to cultivate this whole culture of empathy within Microsoft and seeing actually very good results for being able to do that. And being able to your sales staff to be able to see the world from the customer's perspective. In Microsoft, they take it so far that they actually extend this concept of empathy when they think of innovation. They try to design products and services in terms of, from the customer's point of view, in terms of what their needs are. So empathy is particularly important, I think, especially where you are building a long-term relationship, the ability to have the wisdom and to be able to resist the temptation to sell things, services, and products to your customer that they may not need really at the moment. Building rapport is an obvious one. The ability to sell your personality and to come across as authentic, I think helps a lot in building trust. And then I think this whole idea of having a spirit of entrepreneurship, of being a self-starter who is understanding that it's all about continual improvement and having the drive to be able to drive for that kind of continuous improvement always. So those for me are, I think, the 5 things that I would say, the 5 skill sets that are important for this particular role. But when we come to the discussion stage, I'm very happy to hear alternative points of view from ourselves as well. And then, when I think about the one thing that could, there are many things that could trip up a head of sales. But I think one thing that in my eyes is particularly important is just for them to have a passion for the product or service, because I think a lack of passion for the product or service that you're meant to be selling, I think can trip you up and quite badly as well. I think it could lead to disastrous results. And I also think, from my personal point of view, that when you are working on something that you are passionate about, it never actually feels work. At the moment, one of the things I'm involved in personally is designing and developing a conference for small and medium enterprises, which we hope to run in June. And I was in a 3-hour meeting this morning with my partners who I'm working on this conference with. And we just all said that we're working so hard, we're driving so hard, but it never feels like work because it's our passion. And so I think having that passion is very, very important. And then, going back to this whole concept of authenticity, I think it's also important that I think it would be hard to be able to sell a product or service if you don't, in an authentic way, if you don't actually have a passion or if you don't like it. When I think of businesses in general, the other thing I think that I would reflect on when it comes to the head of sales position, especially in listed companies, is the whole annual financial cycle in these businesses. In a listed entity, for instance, public companies continuously face pressure from the market and shareholders, which causes them, as we all know, to focus on short-term results. And as a consequence, the company's management are often under scrutiny because investors are always looking for profits. And also we've got this whole, I think, mindset, most of us, that profits must just continuously be rising. So we put a lot of pressure on listed entities, and even in unlisted entities, you'll find that kind of pressure as well for the owners of the business. And I think sometimes this can lead to management using questionable practice. And it also puts a lot of pressure, of course, on this position of head of sales. So it's also important when recruiting for this position, I think, to get somebody in who is very mature with regards to understanding who they are, with regards to having an embedded set of ethics, I think, to be able to understand that, you know, the business will look for them for growth. But at the same time, it's important not to cut corners. It's important to maintain ethics at all times. Those are some of my reflections at this point. Thank you for allowing me to share them with you. And I'll come back later and have a conversation with all of you when we open the floor to you.
Thank you,
Angel.
Really, really great to hear. Thank you for those key skills and the importance of the passion. And I just, you know, if you're a really good salesman, can you teach the passion, or, you know, can you develop it for something? But I think the fact that you've spoken about the authenticity and the listening to client wants helps you then tailor what they need. And so that ability of empathy, you know, you don't often necessarily put empathy with sales. And I think that's a very, very important distinction that we now need to concentrate on. So thank you very much, Bridge. We'll definitely chat to you a little bit later. I'm now delighted to welcome Kendi. Kendi Ntwiga previously worked as the country lead at Microsoft Kenya. She is now the global head of misrepresentation at Meta. In her earlier career, Kendi was the general manager of the East, West, and Central Africa cluster at Checkpoint Software Technologies, and she held leadership roles at HP, Oracle, and Intel. So certainly this idea of, you know, being able to sell the software piece, you haven't physically got a product in your hand. It's a very, very interesting part. I'm sure Kendi growing up the ranks of, you know, being strong in the sales and now in a fully leadership position has some great things to share. It would be great as well, Kendi, if you could comment, you know, in terms of if leadership skills or the lack of thereof is important, you know, and the goal setting, you know, if they're unrealistic or not. I know you want to highlight a bit of that, and maybe comment further on those soft skills would be wonderful. So where is Kendi?
Hi, Angel. I'm here. I hope you can see me.
Welcome.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Welcome.
So thank you for having me. I got into sales by fluke, and I got into sales in 20. Please don't date my age, but I got into sales, into active real and sales in 2007. And when I was looking for a job, I was very particular. I said, I'm not looking for a sales job. So you know how you're looking for all jobs. I'm like, I want to be paid a lot, but I do not want a sales job, because the picture I had of sales was going door to door, knocking under the sun, dust, and I wanted some soft kind of life. Anyway, so when I'm going about my business, actually, and the time I was working for a local Pan-African company, that I was the business development account manager. We wasn't sales, it was just getting funnels. So I was very clear, I'd split it. I was like, business development I can do, because all I'm doing is talking to customers, then I hand over to the salespeople. When I was doing that, a competitor saw me working, and when HP came to the market and they wanted to hire somebody who was going to do HP software, the competitor went on and gave my name. So when HP called me and said, we have a job for you, we want to talk to you, I was like, okay, it's HP, go listen to them. But then they told me it's a sales job. And I'm like, come on, I said it's not a sales job, but then I had been told, you don't say no to the opportunity first, go through the process. If you get the job at that point, you decline. Then the page, they sent me the proposal or the initial contract. And I looked at the pay, which was 50-50. I look at the 50% and I'm like, I cannot not take this job. They are paying me so much. So then I went back to myself and I was like, you know what? You have to learn how to sell. And that is how I got into sales. So when I look at what's been consistent to help me be successful in sales, which I had to learn on the extreme. I realized, and just for the context, I'm not an extrovert, I'm not loud, I'm more of an introvert, which was what was telling me I don't want to talk to people too much, because selling to me was talking to people. But with time, I realized, and to build on to actually the previous speaker, what Brigitte said, the bit of being able to understand the pain a customer is going through is what puts you in the edge of positioning software. Because what is software? It is intangible. I have to identify what it is that you're trying to solve, then help you see how you can use that software to solve the problem. And that takes empathy. And so I had to become very comfortable in listening and empathizing, then helping to solve the problem. But then with time, as I grew through on, what I realized now, as my responsibilities started to grow and I started to get promoted, then now I needed to sell not just directly as myself, but through people. And I needed to be able to transfer the skill of selling of what I was doing so well. I realized I needed to be very comfortable with being accountable. So one of the other things that I believe is successful is required to be looked for when you're looking for a head of sales is for a person who's very comfortable with being accountable. And by accountability, I don't mean it from accountable to the top. That's okay. But it's accountability to your team, so that there's no way you will go up and take the approach of do as I say, but not as I do. In leading sales, I need to be very comfortable. You need to be very comfortable, or whoever you're hiring needs to be very comfortable with having the team do as they do. And when the team sees you pulling your weight, then they know if the boss can do this much, then we also must stand up and do more. And what happens as you become accountable, then it builds trust. And as it builds trust, then and your care extends, the care extends then to the team. They realize that their leader, who's the head of sales, can actually take a bullet, quote, for them. And so in turn, they take a bullet for you. And so if there's a focus that needs to be, if there's a target that needs to be met, they will go the extra mile. The sales team will then go an extra mile to actually help you, the head of sales, meet that target. So that means because you allowed yourself to be accountable to your team, because you build trust with your team and credibility, because they see the aspect of care, and you understand, you're with them on the ground, you're with them in the gutter, like we call it, that they know that you will go beyond, above and beyond, to just make sure that they succeed as themselves, but also succeed as a team, which then automatically means the head of sales succeeds, and as the head of sales succeeds, the company then succeeds. So when you're hiring, when you're the CEO that is hiring, and which I look for now, if I have for a person who's leading the business, I really just look for that accountability, the empathy, that's the listening, the base, and to grow people. So the growing people, which is the selling through others, the other angle to that is being able to understand differently what motivates different people. Now, remember, I didn't start my career wanting to be in sales. But the moment I saw the paycheck, because I knew the freedom I wanted from a financial perspective and the potential there was, and I had backing of a brand, which was HP, I decided, you know what? I have to give a shot at this. I'm going to go for it. So I was motivated to then go for it. So which then marries, because as you build them, you understand what motivates each of the people you're working with. So then build on that. To some, it is the flexible hours. So then it means how do you them succeed in the flexible hours? To others, it is the commissions that they earn. So to such, then you understand, you sell the vision. How critical is leadership? How critical is leadership in hiring a sales leader? I look at leadership as influence, as being able to influence. And I look at leadership as starting with leading oneself. So the lack of leadership, therefore, means you don't lead yourself, but it also means you do not influence the people around you. So how do you sell without influencing? So it's critical that one has the leadership skill. They are coming in to be a sales leader, and also mind for that, because what sales is an analogy I like to use is it's someone being the CEO of their business. So whether it's an account manager, whoever it is, there's a territory that they're covering. And in that territory, it is up to them to define what kind of support they need to meet their target. That is in itself. That is running a company. It's just that as you grow, you're either running a company that's a 200,000 rand or dollar business, a $2 million business, whatever that target is, that's what your business is. But you're the CEO for that business, which then brings in the leadership skills, which I believe are super important and be in order to influence, but also to support and to go the deeper end. The last bit I will talk about is where the soft skills are. Is a phrase I learned from one of my leaders through my career who said, people buy from people. If you think about the times you've had to buy or the times you've had to decide, so there are two products, and it could be a car, be anything which serves almost similarly, and they are priced almost the same way, or even one is just slightly higher, and you're deciding which should I go for. What happens all the time, most of us, we think of the person that is selling to us, which goes back to people buy from people. So soft skills is what we call the people skills. So for a person who's then a sales leader, they need to have people skills first to interact with their team that they're building, but people skills also at the next level of the customers. So when they do that, they're able to appeal and build the relationship aspect that helps them to succeed and help people to want to buy from them. So I know I've said a lot, but I'm staying on. We'll have a conversation and we'll be able to have different questions which we can tackle.
Thank you so much, Kendi. It's so much rich content. I'm writing so many different things down, which I can't wait to ask you all about. I think, maybe later just to share if there's any specific strategy about how to be more of a person in a conversation. Is there something, is there a way that you can enter it or listen for a bit about that? Are there any key little tips? I think that we certainly, from our point of view, when we recruit business development or salespeople, we can tell almost immediately if they're right or wrong. There's something about that first conversation. Do I like this person? Is this somebody I want to work with, or I would want to listen and work with? And the fact that our executive search consultants, that they also feel quite important when they themselves are interviewing the candidate, because if you think about it, this candidate is trying to sell themselves. And if they can't sell themselves, then how are they supposed to sell anything else? There's a very interesting dynamic that happens with sort of all this intuitive seeing people as people, and that soft conversation in the beginning counts so much. And I say to the team, trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, they might be right on paper. They might have done the case studies. They've got the sales that's off the chart, but something doesn't feel right in your gut. Trust that. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. So that was Kendi. We will do a little bit chat. If you go along, put questions in the chat, put your comments, they'd like to pick up on this or that. We also would love to hear what people love and hate about executive search firms or recruiters, or where they get it right or wrong. So as much content would be great in that chat as possible. And I'm really excited to welcome Roger. Oh, sorry. There's your name. There you are, from Swarovski, and Roger was previously the global general manager of Swarovski Lighting, and earlier in his career he was the vice president of HR for North America at Swarovski. Before then, he was the senior director for human resources. He was a senior director, HR business partner for Mars. His career spans South Africa, Europe, Middle East, and USA across sales, marketing, and human resources. And we are especially delighted because Roger, after being able to live and work anywhere in the world, has decided to come home to our beautiful, crazy South Africa. So it's really great to welcome you, Roger. And we look forward to hearing about some of your stories about, small organizations compared to the big ones. And any insight you've got on the remuneration commission story, that often we struggle. How do you, get that right? And all the other bits about relationship building and how you can get sold on a great candidate, but they're not really the right one. So I know you want to tell us all about that. Thank you very much.
Angel, thank you very much, and great to meet everybody on the call. Kendi, I won't date myself by telling you when I started selling, but it was a number of years before you did. And I've got an interesting career, and this was an interesting webinar for me because I started in sales. So I was the head of sales for Mars in South Africa. I then moved into HR, and I've actually been back to sales a couple of times in my career. And I think I want to sort of share some stories around recruiting salespeople. So, and just some of the experience, because I completely agree with Angel. There's a gut feeling here, but one of the things I'm going to talk about is sort of fit. And a head of sales, a head of business development, driving your revenue and your top line is absolutely critical. But you also need to find a person that fits into your team, fits into your culture, is not just going to be a complete lone wolf and go off selling and without actually working and building sort of authentic culture that you want in your organization. I'll share an example first of a smaller company. So after Mars, I was recruited by a luxury Swedish bed and mattress manufacturer. The best possible bed you will ever sleep in your life. I mean, they're completely at the top of the brand pyramid, very expensive, small with high growth aspirations. And I was tasked with finding a head of sales, global. Worked with a Big 5 recruitment firm. Angel, I didn't know you then, so sorry, would have used you obviously. And I think that for me, being a smaller company, trying to hire what I call above your weight, so trying to pull somebody out of a bigger organization that's got the skills and the competencies and the leadership that you need, but to get them to come and join a smaller organization, it really is about storytelling and selling. Right, you've got to form an emotional connection with that candidate, and we did this. We found this lady, and she was coming from a very big global business. The headhunter did an amazing job to get her to even come talk to us. And fortunately, I had a CEO at that stage who was, an amazing storyteller. He sold the vision of the company, he sold his plan, he sold where we wanted to go. We took her over to Sweden, and we'd actually put our beds into a boutique hotel where she would be staying. So we sort of, we kept the brand connection going all the way through her interview process. So she slept in the bed, she went to the factory, she met the individuals. And by the time she got back on that plane to go back to the US, she was super excited, right? So it puts you in a really good space for negotiating compensation, for negotiating long-term incentives, because a person like that is walking away from a lot of cash in a big organization. But we managed to land her, and she did an amazing job for us. So I think my lesson here is take your brand all the way through your candidate experience. Work very hard with your hunter to make sure you're finding the right candidates to talk to first, and then sell them on the story, the emotion, the connection. As Kendi said, people buy from people. People join businesses also because of people. Right? So use that, leverage that connection to bring in great candidates. I use a similar example for the same business, actually, recruiting head of business development North America. This young man reached out to me. His CV looked amazing. He was one of the best interviewees I think I've ever spoken to. Sort of had all the answers, did everything right. Was eloquent, had the right brands in his background. His references were really good. There was like a kneeling doubt somewhere. I thought, this is too good to be true. This is too good to be true. put him through the process. He met the CEO, he met the management team, he did all those things. We hired him. Complete mistake. One of the biggest mistakes I've made. The fit was completely wrong. The ability to, a big first sign for us was he didn't have the ability to put together a sales forecast. Right. So all the razzle dazzle of a top salesperson, all the right words, all the right background, had worked for the right brands. But I think my point here is take time to really dig. And we didn't have a recruitment partner on that one, which, again, remiss of us. You lose that extra diligence of you guys digging in the background. And so I think, the lesson for me was salespeople are very good at selling. Salespeople can sell themselves. So just be a little bit careful that you're making sure your process gives you all the due diligence, expose them to different situations. If possible, put them into real life work situations before you pull the trigger on a big hire, which is, because once they're in, it's harder to get them out. And I think the third point I'd make, sort of that I found to be very good, because I said salespeople are a certain type of dynamic. They're a certain type of personality profile. They're driven. They're often extroverted. They're big go-getters. Fitting them into your executive team is another piece of this puzzle I think you have to think very carefully about. So we actually put together a process where we had a formal onboarding for a new leader in our organization. So you would buddy up the head of sales with another member of the executive team. You put them through sort of a formal onboarding process. This is the way we work. This is the way we handle conflict. These are our meeting protocols. So trying to sort of accelerate that runway and speak to the softer skills to make sure that salesperson is building relationships within your organization, allowing them to get what they need to do their job, and also contribute to the broader good of the organization and not be this lone wolf salesperson who's out there doing their own thing. So I enjoy recruiting salespeople. I do think it's I do think it can be challenging. I think it's very interesting. I think finding the right balance between commission-based compensation and guaranteed base, putting together a bonus that is achievable but a stretch, because the first thing a good salesperson is going to do the numbers. How long is the sales pipeline? How long is it going to take me to get commission? Am I going to get, because they're doing the numbers in their head. So I think that balance of short and long-term compensation is a fit for your industry, your stage of development where you are. But I think you need to think very, very carefully, because that's, as Kendi said, you take a sales job because you can make a lot of money. And good salespeople are hungry to make a lot of money. So I think, my experience is make sure it's stretch, make sure it's achievable, make sure they can see the upside, because then they will go and get you the results.
Roger, thank you. That's really, really good for thought. I wonder, when you talk about, putting the candidate through real life situations or case studies, I mean, it would be great to hear if you have any examples of those. We often consult with our employer to say, we think the case study should be this, but often, it's hard just to tell in that short space of time. So and especially if the candidate is working elsewhere still, can you talk us a little bit through that real life?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my own personal experience. So I was approached to join Mars in South Africa, and I was invited in, and they said, please come an hour and a half before your interview. Like, okay. And I walked in, they put me in a conference room and they gave me a case study. They said, please do a business analysis of this, and we'd like you to do a 10-minute presentation, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. And it was the case study was called Mark's Sandwich Cafe. I never forget this, because it was a small guy in London who has his sandwich cafe, and he's thinking about should he open a second store. And I had to prepare for an hour and then present this to the recruitment team, and be questioned on that case study. So how was my critical thinking? Did I have financial acumen? Could I put together a presentation? Could I deal with questions on my feet? So, all the skills you're looking for come in that, that pressure cooker of a presentation. And then from there, we went into the interview, and we used that. And actually, I think today Mars probably still use it, because it does, you're putting that person in as close to a real life working situation as you can.
That's a really, really great example. I mean, usually we send our candidates case studies a couple of days before. And more often than not, I think they're not necessarily even on the category that the client themselves are. But what I like, as we know with the sales piece, it's not just being given a menu of products to sell, it's the strat around it and the competitor piece. And, what are the strengths? What do I dial up? So that whole credible thinking and finance piece, but I think the creativity in honing in on what the important thing is to dial up and sell. And what's interesting is that the interview then is around what that case study presentation is about, and that informs the questions. I don't know, Kendi or Brigitte, if you have examples of any other, clever ways of stress testing the candidates, any real life simulations or things that went right or wrong, trying to, understand or ascertain their abilities.
Yeah, Angel, I could add, and thank you, Roger, for that. One of the things, the most nerving aspect of hiring a salesperson, like you said, is being sure that the person who showed up for the interview is a person who shows up on day one of reporting at work. And that's always a risk that we take. So one of the ways I have also seen beyond the case studies is the behavioral questions. And most of the global multinationals, actually, when we're looking for a particular skill, what is used is the behavioral questions, which speak to give us different scenarios of what you did in these situations. Now, if a person is having to go through a series of interviews of those, not many are able to lie through that process, or at least you're able to catch it somewhere in between. So if behavioral questions then are very effective or more effective in just identifying how that person works, what kind of experience they've had before, also what challenges they may have, but as well, looking at if they come in as a culture fit, because that's also another important aspect, because they speak to the how they did it. The other aspect, by the end of it, because now I'm not actively directly in sales, but the last hiring I did for sales, which was about a year and a half ago, I learned to also ask, how we ask only for reference people as their employer or a supervisor you worked for. For sales, one of the things one can consider is actually working through the ecosystem. So if it is their customers they served, do they have two customers who can speak to their selling ability or how their kind of relationship they had? If it is a 2-tier, 3-tier sort of business, where most software businesses are such, where you work through the channel in country, there are partners who can then speak to this. And by partners, it is the local partners who can speak to the ability of the salesperson. You will find the partners more often or not, because they know the person being hired is coming in to complement their business cycle, would be very open, and they will give feedback that is actually pointed. So 2 things, what I said first, go through the behavioral questions, helps you understand a wider scope, wider thinking, get to know more about the candidate. But then also the second bit, the references, go beyond the employer, look at the ecosystem, who have they worked with previously, if it is partners, if it is customers, sometimes even people who worked in their team, what kind of a leader were they? Of course, there's the balance. The balance with that is it's supposed to be a discrete process. But then if you're back to the last 2 or last one, there's the aspect where they say references are required, right? So at that point, there's a balance that needs to be achieved.
Thank you, Kendi. That's really, really great tips. So I think also what I'd like to ask a bit about, sometimes when we need to bring, I suppose it's more business development people on board, we know how important that title is. And I know when people are trying to sell to me, the minute I see sales in their job title or even business development, I'm just put off because it feels like that's all their end game is. And sometimes we've gone back to the employer to say, are you open to this kind of title or that kind of title? Because it feels like it, gives them the gravitas. So, it's a senior thought, but also they don't only wear the hat of I'm coming to sell to you. So it would be great to hear from the three of you, if relevant, of, any interesting title changes that worked or didn't work, or thoughts on that.
I can go first. I think it's an interesting one because, we're a global economy today as well, right? And different titles mean different things in different regions. So, if you're recruiting in Europe, it can be different to the USA. It can be different to, I think there is sort of a little bit of a stigma to the sales piece. I hear a lot more people talking about commercial head. I've sort of chief commercial officer, business development, yes. And then, you're into whether it's a director or is it a vice president or is it I think titles can get very complicated. My philosophy in this is, as long as it fits our internal structures from an HR point of view, what makes sense to the client and the customer base. What's going to get you in front of the right people that you're selling to, and that should drive, because obviously we need to get you client facing.
Thank you.
I would agree. I mean, just yesterday I was meeting with the commercial director, is what he calls himself, at a client's office that I'm assisting with something. So that seems to be more the trend at the moment. So going for commercial director, from what I've seen. I do think it's a little softer than sales head. I do think there's a little bit of a stereotype around that whole idea of a sales head. You sort of like have the idea that perhaps they are overly aggressive. It's not necessarily true, but that sort of stereotype does exist.
Thank you. So let's look at the chat. So Adrian, how do you give a candidate an opportunity in sales when the CV doesn't promote or sell the person as much as we would like? I don't know, Adrian, do you want to just jump on and just elaborate slightly on that, if you wouldn't mind explaining your question? I don't know if Adrian's there. So let's move then to Tata's question. How is confidentiality guaranteed when you engage partners while a candidate is in employment? Yes, that is often one, if they've climbed the ranks of one entity, and they need references, but you don't want to tell anybody yet that they're thinking of leaving. That's a good question.
Can I comment quickly? I think that was such a powerful suggestion from Case in terms of looking at the system. And I think I would address this particular suggestion is that I wouldn't go to the person's immediate clients. I would look at a company they had worked for previously or even 2 cycles ago, and I would go to those clients because, it's not immediate. And also, if you go to current clients and they realize they're going to lose the connection and the person they often interact with from a sales point of view, these relationships are built over time. It may also not be a very comfortable thing. So you may have to just go back 2 or 3 cycles for that one. I know, Kendi, it's your suggestion. Maybe you don't agree.
I agree, spot on. So it can be what you've said actually, so it's not the immediate ecosystem that they are working with. And I'll say why this is important. You know, financial, they're just a limited financial institutions in any market. It doesn't matter which market there is. And one of the bigger players in the financial services industry that only positions to financial services industry came to one of the markets that I was operating in. And I look to actually hire a regional leader. And we know when we do regional leadership, most of it is driving revenue, especially when it's really still with a different title, which is what you say. And then you have the supporting system to help you achieve the targets. And what this financial institution failed to do is informally just have a casual conversation with your key players on what they think of a particular lesson. These conversations come up, right? Because the financial institution is already in the market, the provider to the financial institution is already in the market anyway. And all they need to do is when they're, we're looking, and it doesn't have to be something like it is confirmed that this person is hiring. It could be just presenting a number of candidates. We're really looking for a leader for the region. We've seen these profiles. We have not necessarily approached them. What are your thoughts? In that case, because then you're talking to the main players who are your customers, they're able to share the experience. So what this player did, they did not do that. They went on and hired somebody who had actually lost business for their previous employer because the interpersonal skills they had were roughing up all the customers. So then the big brand has already hired, and you know how it is, advertised throughout the regional leader. And all of us in the market are looking and like, did you really do your homework? Because that was not rocket science. It was just going to be a very informal conversation of our biggest players is this sort of banks or this insurance companies. If I just speak to one or two in a very casual and confirmed way, I can get a feel as to who these people are who are in the market. I hope that makes sense.
That's a really great one. I think we do that as well often, Kendi. You know, we know who the big players are. They kind of, some of them are good personal friends, and you do just sort of say, by the way, do we know, is this a good egg or not? You know, if you're able to comment, and it's really, you know, important, the reputation and the actual persona that they have out there is, you know, makes them an authentic person. Me, what specific qualities would you look for in a sales manager in charge of several brands from different categories and suppliers? For example, a distributor company, FMCG products. I asked this because they would need to work closely with several other partners who have different corporate cultures, culture fit requirements. Presenting authenticity across several brands may be more challenging to identify.
That's a great question. Look, I think a sales manager across multiple brands, I mean, you have to be able to connect with each of your brands, because, you know, each of those brands is looking for you to have their brand top of mind, you know, as much as possible, right? So I think building relationships with the key people in each of those teams, understanding the culture, understanding the brand in detail, and being very, very responsive to the needs of each of those brands. Because if you, having run a distributor sales force, if you're not feeling you're getting the fair share from the sales team as a brand, you're gonna complain, right? So I think very authentic, very outgoing, very strong ability to connect with people easily and quickly, detail oriented, so that you can actually deliver on each of the premises that the brand have, and, you know, probably a thick skin, because those brands are going to put a lot of pressure on you.
We can hear. Are you there, Carthew? Do you want to...
Can you hear me? Thank you, and thanks for a great conversation and webinar. I just wanted to find out, as a sales leader, my question comes into the the candidates that we want to bring into sales leadership roles. And I specifically asked this question based on, as a follow-up on the questions that I asked around confidentiality, but maybe in a broader context, in terms of identifying suitable and capable candidates. I'm quite worried about the traditional notion of before we recruit for a certain leadership role, we go into the market and try and find, the example that was used here was in financial services, and say, okay, have you guys worked with the guy in the space? What do you think of him? Maybe just to put some context into my question here. In 2016, I was appointed by TransUnion as the executive sales leader for public sector and telecommunications, and in a space that I had never worked in. Obviously, I was recruited there I was marketed there by Homecoming, Angel and the guys there. Completely a market that I had no experience on. And what carried me into the role was pretty much my success in other parts of IT where I was a sales leader. And that was actually the last time I actually used the services of an executive search firm, because from there, the next search firm was just a disaster. And I made a decision from there that I'll never use the services of an executive search firm. But here I am again in this webinar having this conversation. So my question here is, what is the danger of as sales leaders trying to recruit regional leaders, and we depend on the traditional reference checking, whereas we could be leaving a capable skill that is sitting on a completely different market, but they have a capability of strategically running sales organizations and turning them around regardless of the markets that they've operated in?
Thank you, Tata. That is a very good question. I mean, Roger on the call, he's sales and HR and general management. I mean, it's great that you can move between them. Kendi, did you want to comment?
Yes, and thank you for just a quick one, then Roger can come in. And thank you for that question, which is in essence, what you've asked is the same. If you look at the role I do now, it has nothing to do with the experience I've gained over the years. And so it's a shot that I took, but more a shot the company took, which goes back to the behavioral questions I was talking about. So that what you're looking for, what you're helping your client understand, the one you're recruiting for, is there are aspects they need to check out for without, especially a regional leader has people. Okay, let me pause. When you're a sales leader, it means you don't necessarily need to have the full local context because you're delivering through people. Having local context is helpful, but what is more important is being able to be a relevant escalation point so that you're helping the teams solve problems. So if you can help your clients be able to see that aspect of, and let's use French and English. With Africa, we have French speaking and we have English speaking. Sometimes when you're recruiting for French speaking Africa, they say the leader, it is desirable that the leader be able to speak French, but they use the word desirable. So the lead in that aspect, because the people on the ground can speak French, it's not a mandatory thing for the lead to speak French. So in the same way, if you can convert that discussion in that sense that they can show, your candidates can show their excellence in execution, their sales capability, only that it happens to be a different industry, there is actually value in diversity. Then they come in and can be able to deliver through their teams, and their teams will then give the local context that is required, as long as the leader projects the behaviors that are needed for them to succeed in the role. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Kendi.
Angel, can I build very quickly on that? Just
Yes,
because I think it's I think Kendi's 100% right that the local context is going to come from the team. A good leader who's moving cross-functional, cross-market needs to assess their team very quickly and make sure they've got the right diversity and the right skills on their team. And when I've moved cross-functionally or whatever, it's always about how do I build trust in my team quickly and how do I use them to close the gaps and help me develop. And then the other thing is, I think when you get to a regional leadership role, you're as much recruiting for potential as you are for technical ability to execute. Right, the sales skills for that role are the price of entry. We're then beginning to look for, okay, can this guy do the role? What else could this guy do in our organization? So it really becomes, for me, it becomes a potential as opposed to a pure performance and track record conversation.
Thank you, Roger. So I'm going to read out the last couple of questions, and I'd love our storytellers, our speakers, to feel free to sort of pick one or two of them, if that makes sense, or put in their last thoughts. So from Kanya, how much weight is placed on the pronouns that a candidate uses in an interview? Is it the I versus the we, self-confident versus collaborator qualities, which are most appreciated? From Charles, for a new product, how do you create the right balance of fixed versus commission in the remuneration? And from Ian, what character would you look for in a sales lead that is vital in allowing them to take over a lead from their team and close the deal? Bridge, do you want to start? Can I throw you in there if you've got some comments or just closing thoughts? You're on mute. There you are.
I think that I'm looking at the questions here again. I think the character that I would look for in a lead that is able to take over a sales lead from a subordinate and close the deal is definitely some of the attributes we were speaking about earlier. So the ability to build trust and rapport very, very quickly, I think, with the team that is being pitched to. I think that, this whole conversation of I versus we, I think collaborative is always important, but it doesn't replace confidence. I think you actually need to be collaborative and have confidence at the same time. And I think that I would be reluctant to have a situation where somebody just takes over at the last minute in order to close a deal. I think it's got to be a we conversation, and it's got to be done collaboratively, I think, between the leader and their particular subordinate.
Nice. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Kendi, let's hear any answers to those questions or last thoughts or anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, so the closer aspect, and so let me do the closer aspect. I think if you look at the mix in a person, the mix of spontaneity versus structure, and spontaneity together with confidence is what allows a person to leap up and go in to bring something to an end, or almost play like, this is it, we've been doing this journey for so long, I need to make a decision. That person can close. The structure part of that, and that's why I'm saying the mix of that, the structure part of that is that most of the companies or the different products that are sold, there's a methodology that is proven to be followed. So, which is mixed with accountability. So the lead needs to be comfortable with being accountable to that methodology that is published and proven, so that they are going through the process, whether it is showing value, whether it is, ticking off, is there a budget, all of that, so that at the time when the deal needs to be closed, or at the time when a hard decision needs to be asked of the customer, they can actually go in and ask it at the right time, and the customer is in a position to act because the method was followed. In terms of fixed versus commission, again, it depends on the industry. It depends on the route to market. When I've worked for software companies, it's always been 50-50. for account executives. As you get into leadership, some maintain 50, others 60-40. When it comes to those who sell through the channel, because then the channel is doing maybe a different kind of mix, sometimes it's 70-30. So I think Roger may have more experience on that space and he can comment. But yeah, those would be my final comments. Otherwise, thank you for having me in here.
Thank you, Kendi.
Yeah, just to build again on the compensation piece, I think if it's a completely new product, it's going to depend a little bit on how long is the sales cycle. So for instance, I've been working with a tech startup and they have it's a 12-month sales cycle. So we've set the compensation up that it's heavily fixed initially, with a sort of a high close the deal commission, and then as the sales guy starts to build up their client base, then it starts to switch more to a commission and a lower base. So they're getting good reward that's guaranteed up front because you want to keep them loyal and keep them in the game. But then over time, as they start to get their hands on closing deals, it swings to a more commission-based model. But that's a completely new startup product portfolio. I agree with Kendi and other things. It's 60-40, 50-50, 70-30 sometimes for sort of senior executives. But I think if Charles was asking about a new product, then I would sort of think about how long is the sales cycle, weighted heavily on fixed initially, and then have it move to commission as the sales team get up to speed.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Kendi. I've got so many notes here. I can't wait to write us so much of the stuff and so many more questions we'd love to ask you. I think for me, so many of the takeouts, and we'll certainly forward them to everybody for further commentary and all the rest. But I think that, as recruiters, what we've learned, certainly for your growing ventures, and we like to work multinationals and big companies, and then your growing ventures who have got their seed funding or their Series A and now need to go. The lessons I think we've learned with those ventures growing, and it certainly happened to me in my own life. I'm a third-time entrepreneur. I think some of the mistakes that a founder makes is to go, okay, well, I now need the salesperson. They're going to go and get all the customers and do the thing. And actually, the founder is the storyteller, the key person actually in terms of a business story who actually needs to lead that way. And so we would say to them, Mr. Founder, Mr. CEO, GM, Mrs. You're trying to do too many things at the same time. Why don't we give you a COO, for example, or a fractional HR director, plug some other holes so that you really can concentrate on this dev piece, because nobody can tell the story like you can. And I think that I learned very quickly. So in our business now, this is what I love doing, organizing the webinars and the sundowners and the events and, being out there, because I think that trying to expect, certainly in a growing venture, other people to get it like you do and just give it to them as their job and you sort of sit back, I think is unrealistic as a founder. And I think the last thing I wanted to say was I love this mention around storytelling. And we see it everywhere. And when we recruit people for ourselves, we tell the story always. I mean, the story's kind of behind me. It's all about using skills, sharing skills across the continent, creating prosperity, African companies, generations and generations. The story of why at the heart of Africa and why we like that. And I think sometimes we forget that a good story actually is the thing that sells and that sticks, versus just a very cold product. So I think the best salespeople are the creative ones. They can listen well, they've got the empathy, they can think on the spot with a tailored solution, they've got a story to match, they can inspire their people, they take ownership, they've got some quick wins. They're authentic, they're accountable, so many different pieces. But this has been incredibly rewarding and wonderful, guys. Thank you for our inaugural webinar. I hope you'll join us at the next one. And please feel free to send further questions and any other comments, and we'll probably close off in the next 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Bridge. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Ian.